And Shiva, welcome back, sir. So
Hey, how's it going?
I have been begging for anybody who's watching. I've been begging Shiva to do more presentations because I love how you go through the history of science and like you pull apart these experiments, right? And sometimes they're accurate, sometimes they're not accurate, sometimes it could be interpreted different ways. And that's one of the things that I've seen like in my own history as well, right? Is like
Mhm.
anytime you do an experiment, at the very least, there's always like noise that we throw away, you know? But
Right.
like sometimes, especially lately, like I've been reading that people kind of making experiments fit the predictions, which is also kind of bad. So
Yeah. There's a lot of issues with the experimenter effect, where basically the experimenter is imputing their view on the results, and the way in which they throw away or keep results and interpret them utterly changes what the experiment means. And so, yeah, that's a lot of what the video we're gonna put on today. But I want to say a couple of words before putting the video on. Did you
oh
have
yeah. Well,
the video
it's
available to?
I don't. I can pull, I think I can pull that up, but I did want to ask you, your mic volume is a little low. Is there a way that you can
Okay.
move it closer or
You know what? Let me pick this up and see if I can get it a little closer to me over here. I'll just
and what I
set
will
it on
do in
the
the
couch.
meantime.
Hopefully that is that a little bit better?
Okay, there we go. And there is the video. Okay.
Okay. But yeah, I wanted to say a couple of words before, as kind of a preamble, to sort of make a point, and then start at the video. So if you'll allow me, I just wanted to bring up a kind of a preparation for the video before we started.
Oh yeah. Do you want me to is that this? Do you want me to do the screen
No,
share?
no, that's some other points I wanted to say for right after the video.
Oh, okay. 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 Yeah, go for it, sir. I
Okay. So one of the things I want to bring up is kind of something that is understood in the science of developing artificial intelligence. And so the first example I wanted to give that's going to kind of set things up is that when chess champions are learning how to do things, hopefully some of you may have watched that recent drama. I think it was something Queen's Gambit, I think was the name of it. But basically, the idea is that a lot of what chess champions tend to do is memorize previous games that have occurred before. And that could be a very large portion of the way in which they play is by memorizing all of these games that have occurred. So I want you to think about what exactly is occurring there. Imagine if you only learned chess from memorization of these, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of games and their successive moves. Because the chessboard is fairly limited, it's actually not all that unlikely that you could memorize a very great portion of all the possibilities of what could occur in a chess game. And so what you then have is a stereotype for, even if you as a player played against somebody who all that they did is try to figure out what the probability is that you are conforming to one chess game that occurred in the past or another, then it will seem as though they're playing in a novel fashion, but all they're doing is selecting a game that has occurred before and responding to you with the next move in that game that resulted in a win. So, in other words, they are not playing in a way in which they actually understand the game. Now, that's not the only thing the chess champions do. But let's say that was a type of chess champion. That is, and now, like I said, this is kind of relates to something called the Chinese room, which was an argument against the older version of AI, which is more programmatic and chatbots of ever having any sort of consciousness whatsoever. And it was so the Chinese room is this idea that if you take Chinese symbols to someone who's an English speaker and never, they know nothing about the Chinese language, you could pass some symbols that represent sentences underneath a door, and if they had the right set of rules and had a bunch of other Chinese characters that they could arrange according to a set of rules, just like those chess players, they could then pass another sentence of Chinese characters out from underneath the door, and and the person on the other side, who is an actual Chinese speaker, could appear to have a conversation with the person who's in the room, but they're simply following a set of rules. And understanding that there is this difference between following a set of rules in a way that looks novel, but is not factually novel, that is very important to understanding that this same sort of thing can actually occur in mathematical physics as well. In other words, you can actually have a Chinese room situation where the rules of arrangement are more important than what the characters mean. And so I just wanted to kind of point that out as something that can be occurring, and something that we need to consider as part of the problem with the abstraction and the shut up and calculate version of physics that's been going on for roughly the past 100 years. So, oh, and then there was one other example I wanted to get there, is that one of the things that can also happen is, let's say, for instance, in these very high level games that the chess this chess player who was learning chess through memorization of games learned there was never an instance of a pawn being promoted. Then if that were the case, then they would never promote a pawn, and they would never, and they would insist that that is not a possibility within the game as well. And so there's certain things of that nature where there's a lack of understanding, and that there's this solid line between comprehension and conforming to a set of rules, and not only conforming to the set of rules, but doing so in a way that is it has its own sort of meaning. So in other words, just understanding this kind of differentiation in the way in which we do mathematics for physics, and separate the structures and the way in which they can be fit together properly from what the structures mean, is, I think, a very important distinction that I don't think most people have really recognized as a possibility, that we can actually act as a stochastic parrot in the execution of being a physicist. So let's go ahead and start up that video and run through it, because I think that's a good preamble for it. Can you do that, Tim?
Yeah, sorry, I'm just doing that now. And
Yeah, no problem.
let me see. Okay, there we go. So I'm going to share that, and I'm sharing audio as well. Okay, and perfect. Okay. And so I'm going to play it like this.
To noun. Only by understanding this fact.
You have to back it up. Yeah,
Illusionists invented relativity 15 years before Einstein. That's right. It's historically accurate to say that Einstein merely finished relativity, but the central calculation that defines everything you know about relativity was created 15 years earlier. According to the general theory of relativity, space without ether is unthinkable. For in such space, there not only would be no propagation of light, but also no possibility of existence for standards of space and time. Strangely, only a few historians are aware that Einstein denounced constancy as incompatible with his finished general theory on at least 5 different recorded occasions. And other renowned fathers of physics also called for a return of the ether as the field continued to progress. In 1951, Paul Dirac published a paper on the ether he summed up with the following: "This motion's physical significance in the theory is that if there is any electric charge, it must flow with this velocity. And in regions where there is no charge, it is the velocity with which a small charge would have to flow if it were introduced. We now have the velocity at all points of space-time, playing a fundamental part in electrodynamics. It is natural to regard it as the velocity of some real physical thing. Thus, with the new theory of electrodynamics, we are rather forced to have an ether." In the 80s and 90s, John Stuart Bell gave numerous statements advocating for ether, saying, for instance, "I would say that the cheapest resolution is something like going back to relativity as it was before Einstein, when people like Lorentz and Poincaré thought that there was an ether, a preferred frame of reference, but that our measuring instruments were distorted by motion in such a way that we could not detect motion through the ether." Now, you might be wondering, if this alternative view has merit, why isn't it more widely known or accepted? Well, That's where the history of science and the nature of paradigm shifts come into play. Thomas Kuhn's famous work, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, discussed how difficult it can be for new ideas to replace established paradigms, even when evidence favors them. It's a problem so well known there's a name for it: Planck's principle. Paraphrased, science progresses one funeral at a time. The shift from the many additional calculations required for relativistic ether theory to Einstein's shortcut was so appealing, and Einstein's formulation so mathematically elegant, that physics as a field was reluctant to look back. The more concise formulation reduced manual calculation overhead and made forward scientific progress easier. Relativistic ether never caught on because the work was hard enough without the extra considerations it brings. They asked themselves, why look backwards? And the ether became synonymous with outdated thinking, despite the fact that the Lorentz-Poincaré formulation had no evidence against it. No one ever suspected that all the additional underlying mechanics would ever, one day, grant additional insights, so it was forgotten for a century. But here's the most important takeaway. Whether you prefer the Einstein-Minkowski view or the Lorentz-Poincaré view, the fundamental effects of relativity, time dilation and length contraction, are real observable phenomena. The only debate is about the underlying cause and interpretation, not the effects themselves. These effects aren't just abstract concepts, from the design of particle accelerators to the need to account for time dilation in GPS satellites. The universe really does behave this way, regardless of how we choose to interpret it. The only question is if all the additional underlying mechanics of ether grant us any additional insights. Will the additional information allow us to manipulate space? We're finding that with the many crises cropping up all throughout modern physics, the calls for revolution are being answered with hydrodynamic space we used to just call ether. We'll have to save exactly how the ether paves the way into the future for a different video, and so we come full circle. Just as the illusionists of old sought to understand the fundamental nature of reality by mastering deception, modern physics grapples with the possibility that what we perceive as the fundamental constants of nature might themselves be a kind of cosmic illusion, a perfect compensation that hides a deeper reality. The next time you see a magic trick, remember, you're not just watching an illusion. You're witnessing the roots of curiosity that culminated in a tradition that has driven scientific inquiry for millennia, a tradition that gave birth to relativity itself and continues to shape our understanding of the universe to this day. And who knows, perhaps the next great breakthrough in physics will come not from a laboratory, but from someone who understands that to reveal the truth, you must first master that which is hidden.
Shiva, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Let me click stop sharing. Okay. And let me apologize for not
So yeah, something that
maximizing.
we could do some a little bit of discussion about it, but I did want to say a couple to kind of follow on to that. So so from the ether view, what where can we go from there? And I wanted to say a couple words about that.
Now, can I put your notes up now? Can I put the notes
Yeah,
up that you have?
let's go ahead and
Okay.
start with that because even though I've got these slides prepared, I'm only really I'm only prepared for presenting a little bit of it. I can't really do all of the slides that I put together here. They're more notes than they are really slides. So we'll do some discussion after I just bring up a couple of things that I believe are a kind of a roadmap to how we might be able to manipulate the ether and use that for things such as alteration of gravity. But while we've talked about in the past some of the ideas of what exactly is gravity in the ether view, and that is going back all the way to the way in which we perceive the start of ether theory, which really probably had its best start with Fresnel and in his prediction of the Fizeau experiment, which he successfully predicted would carry ether along at a certain rate and therefore carry light along at a certain rate. It did exactly as he predicted. His theory, however, was that there was more ether. There's an increased density inside of matter that causes refraction instead of the opposite of that, which would still change the wave function in the same way, which is a reduced rigidity. So in other words, it would still slow the light if we looked at it from a perspective of reduced rigidity. So this is the one way in which we can completely turn our perspective of ether and matter inside out. So all these various extensions of ether theory that we see all throughout modern physics, using different terms that they don't say ether, because that's the rule of the past century: never say ether. But things like a crystalline structure with topological defects in it, these are basically spaces that open between. So in other words, when you look at space as the real thing, and matter, and especially things like mass as alterations or reductions to changes to the actual thing of note, then you have a different way of looking at reality. It's kind of inside out of our previous views. So just to kind of look at some of the hints we had mentioned, all of these various ways in which we could see that there's a preferred frame, and that even general relativity had, a preferred frame perspective, and matter of fact, Einstein referred to this often as like a Machian perspective, because he actually liked Ernst Mach's idea that that can be paraphrased, saying that when the subway station jerks, it's the stars that throw you down, and that is basically the idea that there's a universal frame of reference. So the Faraday paradox, just to quickly touch on that, but I think that this is kind of maybe one of the small roadmaps along the path of experimentation, et cetera, and how we might manipulate the ether. The Faraday paradox is the specific embodiment of it that I'm talking about is when you take we know that we can induce an electric current with the difference in movement between a magnet and a conductor, right? We just move a magnet through a conductor, it creates a current. We're all very usually aware of that if we know anything about electricity, etc. However, with the Faraday paradox, one of the things we find is you can take a circular magnet and a circular conducting disc, and if you put the magnet over it and rotate the disc, of course, you can produce a current in the disc. However, if you hold the disc in place and move the magnet, it does not create a current, which is very unexpected. And then worse yet, you can take the magnet, place it on the disc, and spin them both, and it will also create a current. And so what this indicates, I believe, is that there is and just as Faraday also believed, there is a preferred frame in which the magnetic field is staying stationary. Now, we can go into some discussions about that later, but just from this perspective, that I believe that is a sort of a hint along the way that these the lines of force are, of course, these vortex filaments, which I'll briefly just say they actually work well from the Kosarak continuum perspective, where we have a superfluid space, which is also just like Maxwell's inviscid, fluid that he modeled Maxwell's equations in. And so the Kosarak superfluid actually can help us look at the direction that Einstein eventually took towards torsion from a more microscopic perspective, and allows those additional degrees of freedom in rotational, basically rotational degrees of freedom that will that allow a different view of torsion that I believe that basically had he rejected Minkowski's formalism eventually, I believe that Einstein and Cartan would have actually developed ether theory in a way that would have already advanced us far beyond where we are currently. But so the first thing is the Faraday paradox that gives us kind of a hint in direction. And then here's the thing that I wanted to talk about really quickly that I think is very valuable for people who want to do experimentation in, and look at things like, for instance, Tesla's idea of scalar waves. So a lot of times whenever we talk about scalar waves, there's some interpretation of Tesla's works and words, and a lot of times probably one of the best interpretations are the idea that scalar waves are longitudinal waves in the ether instead of the transverse waves, and that they would travel at orders of magnitude faster than transverse waves, because that's kind of a normal thing with waves that you have of those two types of waves. Generally in the substance there'll be a difference in their speeds, so we kind of expect that a longitudinal wave would travel much faster. But what I wanted to talk about instead is the idea that what Tesla was talking about many times whenever he was talking about wireless transmission. He was talking about loading the ether in a certain way, and for this I need to to describe that there's two types of resonance that people don't really think about. So the original type of resonance that most people tend to think about is that between borders you have a reflecting wave, and that when the waves end up adding up in some way in which you add additional amplitude to the wave repeatedly as it reflects back and forth, you can cause this resonance to store more and more amplitude in a given wave, and it's because of the use of these borders. However, there's another kind of virtual border that is different, and I'll explain it in a way that everyone as a kid had these experiences with water when you swing in a pool. Well, one of the experiences that I had that kind of revealed this secondary type of resonance that does not require borders. But I had the go jump in, rock the pool, the waves kept bouncing back and forth inside the pool, and that was a lot of fun for kids to make the waves higher and higher because they kept adding energy to the waves that were reflecting. However, there is a way in which if you simply touch the surface of the water and press down a little bit, and then keep changing go between a fast frequency and a lower frequency with a higher amplitude, you can begin to make the water bounce further and further and further in place without any borders having any effect. And what you're doing is you're using the reactivity of the substance itself as a way in which to create a local loading of the substance. And so this is a way in which I believe that whenever Tesla was talking about his standing waves, and whenever we hear about these ideas that he was able to light a room where there was light, but there was no source for the light, and whenever he was talking about this way in which of transmitting power, I believe that this was the type of resonance that he meant to convey, and that this type of resonance might itself, as you create this localized resonance itself, may be the way in which he was producing these scalar waves. Perhaps that is just a speculation I have, that perhaps that type of loading of the medium and using that sort of resonance, where you have a sloping between high frequency and low amplitude up to a low frequency with a high amplitude, and cause that loading of the local substance as a method of resonance, which is against the reactivity of the substance. I believe that may be a path that will be fruitful in the future for our development of use of manipulation of space. And so, and just going back to, of course, one of the ideas of work with gravity is basically the local alteration of space's properties, ether's properties, and specifically in its rigidity, and this comes at the same time as all of the increase in vortex filaments and the local vorticity of space, which is what we basically see as the way in which we see there's a gradient produced where a sort of buoyancy effects happens between massive objects. So, okay, so from here, I wanted to, that was just kind of to finish off where the video was going. And I was hoping we could have a little bit of discussion with the group from this point, and about the specifics of the video and how it relates to the development of relativity.
Yeah, Shiva, again, thank you so much.